The smell of disinfectant mixed with stale cigarette smoke burned my nostrils as I scrubbed the cracked tile floor of the back room. Each movement sent sharp pain radiating through my ribs, where Bruno had kicked me yesterday for being too slow. The bucket of dirty water sloshed beside me, reflecting the single, flickering fluorescent light overhead that cast everything in sickly yellow. I'd been at this cleaning job for 6 months now. 6 months since I'd answered that advertisement for housekeeping work in Italy, dreaming of adventure and a fresh start. 6 months since I'd discovered the truth about what I'd actually signed up for. The restaurant above was legitimate enough. Ristorante Bella Vista served tourists and locals alike with mediocre pasta and overpriced wine. But down here, in the basement storage rooms, was where Dimitri ran his real operation. My fingers were raw from the harsh chemicals, cracked and bleeding in places I couldn't bandage without drawing attention. I was 26 years old and felt ancient, worn down to nothing by fear and exhaustion. The other girls who worked here, there were 5 of us total, had stopped trying to escape months ago. I'd watched their light dim one by one until they were just empty shells going through motions. But I hadn't given up. Not yet. Caroline! The sharp voice made me flinch. Svetlana, Dimitri's lieutenant, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Her bleached blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her cold blue eyes assessed me like I was livestock. You're needed upstairs. Now. My stomach dropped. Being called upstairs during the day never meant anything good. Usually they only pulled us up at night, when certain special guests visited the private dining rooms. During the day, we were supposed to stay invisible, scrubbing and cleaning and staying out of sight. I'm not finished with... I started, but her look silenced me. Did I ask if you were finished? She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through my thin shirt. Dimitri has buyers coming. He wants you presentable. Buyers. The word sent ice through my veins. I'd heard whispers about this from the other girls. Sometimes Dimitri sold them to other operations, shipping them to different cities or countries. Most never came back. Svetlana dragged me up the narrow stairs, through the restaurant's kitchen where staff carefully avoided looking at us, and into a small office I'd never seen before. She shoved me onto a stool in front of a cracked mirror. Clean yourself up, she ordered, throwing a makeup bag at me. You have 10 minutes. And Caroline? Her smile was cruel. Try to look grateful. These men are paying good money for fresh merchandise. She left, locking the door behind her. I stared at my reflection. Hollow eyes, bruised cheekbone from last week, hair that desperately needed washing. My hands shook as I opened the makeup bag, but my mind was racing. This was it. If I didn't escape today, I never would. Once they sold me, I'd disappear completely into whatever nightmare awaited. I had no phone, no money, no identification. Dimitri had taken all of that the first week. But I had something more valuable. I'd been watching, learning, memorizing. I knew the kitchen staff rotated shifts at 2 o'clock. I knew the delivery entrance was usually unlocked for 20 minutes during the afternoon wine delivery. I knew that if I could just get outside, there was a police station 4 blocks away. 4 blocks might as well have been 400 with how weak I was, but it was a chance. The only one I'd get. The minutes ticked by. I applied makeup with trembling fingers, making myself look presentable, while my brain screamed at me to run, run, run. Through the thin walls, I could hear voices, Dimitri's accented English, mixing with deeper voices I didn't recognize. Then I heard it. The distinctive rumble of the delivery truck. 2 o'clock. My heart hammered as I stood, moving to the office door. It was locked from the outside, but the lock was old, flimsy. I'd seen Dimitri open it before by jiggling the handle just right. My hands were slick with sweat as I tried. Once, twice. Click. The door swung open. The hallway was empty. I could hear voices from Dimitri's main office, the buyers inspecting whatever documents he was showing them. The kitchen was to my right, the delivery entrance beyond it. I didn't let myself think. I just moved. The kitchen was chaos. Line cooks shouting orders, servers rushing in and out, steam rising from industrial stoves. No one looked at me as I slipped through, just another invisible girl in a world that had trained itself not to see. The delivery entrance was ahead, propped open as a man wheeled in cases of wine. Almost there. Almost... Hey! Svetlana's voice cut through the kitchen noise like a knife. Stop her! I ran. The delivery man tried to grab me, but I was small and desperate, and I ducked under his arm, bursting out into the alley. The October sun was blinding after the dim restaurant, but I didn't stop. I ran toward the street, my worn sneakers slapping against wet pavement. Behind me I heard shouting. Multiple voices. Dimitri's men were coming. The street was busy with afternoon traffic and pedestrians, but I knew from experience that wouldn't save me. People in this neighborhood had learned not to interfere with Dimitri's business. I'd tried screaming for help once, in those first desperate weeks, and everyone had simply looked away. I turned left, sprinting past closed shops and cafes. My lungs burned. My ribs screamed where Bruno had kicked them. But terror pushed me forward. 4 blocks. Just 4 blocks to the police station. 3 blocks. I risked a glance back and saw them. 2 of Dimitri's men, gaining on me. They were bigger, stronger, well-fed. I was running on nothing but fear and starvation rations. 2 blocks. My vision started to blur at the edges. My legs felt like they might give out. The police station was ahead. I could see it, but I wasn't going to make it. A car pulled up beside me. Sleek, black, expensive. The back door opened. Get in. The voice was deep, commanding, unmistakably Italian. I didn't think. I dove into the back seat. The door slammed shut, and the car accelerated smoothly, leaving Dimitri's men shouting in the street behind us. I collapsed against the leather seat, gasping for air, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror and disbelief that I'd actually escaped. Then I looked up and saw the man sitting across from me. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes like polished onyx. Beautiful and completely cold. His suit probably cost more than everything I'd owned in my entire life. He studied me with the detached interest one might give an injured bird that had flown into a window. Grazie, I managed, my voice hoarse. Thank you. I need to get to the police. No police. His accent was thick, but his English was clear. You're running from Dmitri Volkov's operation, yes? My breath caught. How did he know? The police in this city are useless against men like Volkov, he continued, his tone matter of fact. Half of them are on his payroll. You go to them. You'll be back in his basement by nightfall. Despair crashed over me. He was right. I'd heard enough whispered conversations to know Dmitri had connections everywhere. Then where are you taking me? I asked, suddenly aware that I'd jumped from one dangerous situation into another, potentially worse one. The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Somewhere safe, under my protection. Why would you help me? I didn't say I was helping you out of kindness. His dark eyes held mine. In my world, nothing is free. But you have a choice. You can get out at the next light and take your chances with Volkov's men. Or you stay under my protection and accept what that means. What does it mean? It means you belong to me now. The words were delivered calmly, without emotion. Not in the way Volkov owned you. I don't traffic in human misery. But you will live in my house, follow my rules, and in return, you will be safe. Completely untouchable. Do you understand? I stared at this stranger who spoke of ownership so casually, who'd appeared exactly when I needed saving, who looked at me with eyes that promised protection and danger in equal measure. Behind us, somewhere in the city, Dimitri's men were hunting for me. If I got out now, I'd last maybe an hour before they found me. But if I stayed... "What's your name?" I whispered. "Massimo," he said. "Massimo Colalto." The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it suggested it should. And the way the driver, an older man with scarred hands, glanced at me in the rear-view mirror with something like pity, told me I'd just made a deal with someone as dangerous as the man I'd escaped from. "I'll stay," I said, because what choice did I really have? Massimo nodded once, as though my decision had been inevitable. "Then welcome to your new life, Caroline. Try not to make me regret saving you." The drive took us out of the city center, through neighborhoods that grew progressively quieter and more affluent. I watched the world pass by through tinted windows, my body still trembling from the escape, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I'd traded one captor for another, except this one wore expensive suits and spoke in measured tones instead of screaming threats. Massimo hadn't spoken again after our initial exchange. He sat across from me with perfect stillness, occasionally checking his phone with the kind of controlled attention that suggested nothing in his world happened without his knowledge. I studied him cautiously. The strong line of his jaw, the way his suit fit like it had been made specifically for his body, the gold watch on his wrist that probably cost more than Dimitri's entire operation. But it was his eyes that kept drawing me back. They were empty in a way that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with profound absence. Like he'd locked everything human about himself away somewhere deep and unreachable. The car turned through iron gates that opened automatically, traveling up a long driveway lined with cypress trees. The house, no, mansion, that came into view was something from a movie. 3 stories of pale stone with arched windows and a terracotta roof, surrounded by manicured gardens that probably required a full-time staff. "This is home," Massimo said, as the car stopped in front of the entrance. "My staff has been informed of your arrival. You'll be treated with respect. In return, you will not leave the property without my permission. Understood?" It wasn't really a question, but I nodded anyway. What else could I do? A woman appeared as we exited the car, perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled into an elegant bun and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "Benvenuta," she said warmly. "Welcome. I am Sophia, the housekeeper. Come, you must be exhausted." She took my arm gently, and I had to fight back tears at the simple kindness of the gesture. After 6 months of being grabbed, shoved, and handled like an object, this grandmother's tender touch nearly broke me. "Sophia will show you to your room," Massimo said, already walking toward the house. "Rest. We'll talk at dinner." Then he was gone, disappearing through massive wooden doors that closed behind him with a soft thud that sounded like finality. Sophia led me inside, and I tried not to gape at the interior. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, artwork that looked like it belonged in museums. Everything spoke of old money, old power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. "Don't be frightened," Sophia said softly as we climbed a grand staircase. "I know how this must seem, but Signor Colalto is a good man, despite what people say. Complicated, yes. Damaged, certainly, but good where it matters." She opened a door on the 2nd floor, revealing a bedroom that was easily 3 times the size of the entire basement room I'd been sharing with 2 other girls at the restaurant. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in soft cream linens. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. An attached bathroom gleamed with white marble and polished fixtures. "This is mine?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Si, yours alone." Sophia squeezed my arm. "There are clothes in the wardrobe. I had to guess at sizes, but we can adjust anything that doesn't fit. The bathroom has everything you need. Take your time, rest. I'll bring food in an hour." After she left, I stood in the center of that beautiful room and started to shake. The adrenaline that had carried me through the escape was draining away, leaving behind the reality of 6 months of captivity, of fear, of surviving things I'd never wanted to survive. I made it to the bathroom before collapsing. The shower was large enough for 3 people, with multiple shower heads and controls I didn't understand. I turned on water that ran hot and clean, and stood under it fully clothed at first, watching the filth of the restaurant basement swirl down the drain in brown rivulets. Then I stripped, dropping my stained clothes in a heap, and scrubbed my skin until it was raw and red. I washed my hair 3 times with expensive shampoo that smelled like lavender. I stood there until the water started to run cold, as if I could wash away the last 6 months along with the dirt. The wardrobe held clothes in muted colors, soft sweaters, well-cut jeans, simple dresses. Everything fit surprisingly well, though I noticed they were all modest, nothing revealing or suggestive. I chose jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that felt like heaven against my clean skin. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything, when Sophia returned with a tray. Soup that smelled like herbs and vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, fruit, cheese, and water in a crystal glass. "Eat slowly," she cautioned. "Your stomach will need time to adjust to real food again." She was right. After months of stale bread and watery gruel, even the simple soup was almost overwhelming. But I ate carefully, savoring each spoonful, feeling strength return to my body with each bite. "Sophia," I said hesitantly, "what exactly is this place? Who is Massimo Colalto?" She settled into a chair near the window, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "This is his family's estate. The Colaltos have been here for generations, since before Italy was unified, and Signor Massimo." She paused, choosing words carefully. "He is the capo of the Calabrian organization. Very powerful, very respected, and very, very dangerous to his enemies. The Mafia. I'd been rescued by a Mafia boss." "But you don't need to fear him," Sophia continued quickly, seeing my expression. "He doesn't harm women or children. That's his one absolute rule, the line he will never cross. When he found out about Volkov's operation, about what they were doing to girls like you, he was furious. His men have been gathering information for months, planning to shut it down. So I was just... convenient?" The words came out bitter. "No, Cara. You were brave. You saved yourself by running when you did. Signor Massimo simply ensured you didn't get caught again." She stood, collecting the empty tray. "Rest now. Dinner is at 8. Someone will come get you." Alone again, I moved to the French doors and stepped onto the balcony. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and I could hear birds singing in the garden below. In the distance, I saw men patrolling the grounds. Security, obviously, though they were trying to be discreet about it. I was in a gilded cage now, traded one form of captivity for another. But at least this cage had sunshine and clean water and food that didn't make me sick. At least here, no one had kicked me or touched me or looked at me like I was merchandise to be sold. Small mercies. I was learning to survive on small mercies. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of exhaustion. I lay on that impossibly soft bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to remember who I'd been before all of this. Caroline Mitchell, small-town girl from Vermont, literature major with dreams of seeing the world. I'd saved for 2 years to afford this trip to Europe, planned every detail, imagined adventure and self-discovery. Instead, I'd discovered that the world was far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. That evil wore ordinary faces and spoke in pleasant voices until you were already trapped. That no one was coming to save you, so you had to save yourself. A knock at the door pulled me from my dark thoughts. A young woman stood there, perhaps 20, with dark curls and a shy smile. "Signorina Caroline? I'm Lucia. Signora Sophia asked me to help you get ready for dinner." "I'm already dressed," I said, confused. She glanced at my jeans and sweater. "See, but..." Dinner with Signor Colalto is formal. He prefers. She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Right, because of course a mafia boss would have formal dinners. This wasn't just a house, it was a court, with rules and expectations I didn't understand. Lucia helped me select a simple navy dress from the wardrobe and showed me how to arrange my hair in a way that looked elegant rather than just clean. She worked quickly and efficiently, chattering about inconsequential things that I suspected were meant to put me at ease. There, she said finally, stepping back to examine her work. Bellissima, don't be nervous. Signor Colalto can be intimidating, but he's always fair. Fair. What an interesting word choice. At exactly 8 o'clock, Lucia escorted me downstairs to a formal dining room that could have seated 30 people. But only 2 places were set, at opposite ends of a table that seemed designed to maintain maximum distance. Massimo was already there, standing by the windows with a glass of wine in his hand. He'd changed into different clothes, still all black, but more casual now. Dark slacks and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that suggested he didn't just delegate violence, he participated in it. He turned as I entered, those dark eyes sweeping over me with an assessment that was clinical rather than appreciative. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair at the far end. A man appeared, older, probably part of the household staff, and filled my wine glass before I could protest. Another brought plates of food that looked and smelled incredible. Pasta with some kind of seafood sauce, salad with fresh mozzarella, bread that was still steaming. Eat, Massimo commanded. You need to regain your strength. We ate in silence for several minutes. I tried not to wolf down the food, tried to remember table manners I hadn't used in months. But hunger won out over pride. Tell me about yourself, he said finally. Where are you from? How did you end up in Volkov's operation? I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. Does it matter? Yes. The single word was delivered without inflection, but I heard the command in it. This wasn't a request. Vermont, I said quietly. I graduated college 2 years ago. Saved money working 3 jobs so I could travel. I saw an advertisement online for housekeeping work in Italy, room and board included. It seemed perfect. A way to see Europe while earning a bit of money. The agency handled all the paperwork, the visa, everything. And when you arrived? The man who picked me up from the airport wasn't from any housekeeping agency. The memories made my hands shake. He took my passport, my phone, all my documents, said it was for processing, but he'd return them once I was settled. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already locked in that basement. Massimo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How many others? 5 of us in the restaurant. But I overheard them talking about other locations. I think it's bigger than just that one place. It is. He took a measured sip of wine. Volkov runs one of the largest trafficking operations in southern Italy. He's been careful, protected by connections in local government and law enforcement. But he made a mistake when he set up in Calabria. This is my territory. The possessiveness in his voice was unmistakable. Not about me, about the region itself. What will happen to the other girls? I asked. The ones still there? That depends. His dark eyes held mine across the absurd length of that table. On what you can tell me about the operation. Guard rotations, who comes and goes, delivery schedules, anything you observed. Hope and fear warred in my chest. You're going to shut it down? Yes. When? Soon. He stood, moving toward me with that same predatory grace I'd noticed in the car. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. But understand something, Caroline. I'm not doing this because I'm a good man. I'm doing it because Volkov is operating in my territory without permission, cutting into my profits, and drawing unwanted attention from authorities that I've worked hard to keep cooperative. I don't care about your reasons, I said, finding unexpected courage. If you save those girls, if you stop him from doing this to anyone else, I don't care why. Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. You're braver than you look. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid. He studied me for a long moment. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk more about what you remember. And Caroline? He turned back at the dining room door. Don't try to leave the property. My men have orders to keep you here, for your own protection. Volkov will be looking for you. He doesn't like losing his property. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in that massive room with half-eaten food and a future I couldn't begin to predict. I was safe, I reminded myself. I was clean and fed and safe. But as I climbed the stairs back to my beautiful prison, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd simply traded one form of captivity for another. And that Massimo Colalto, despite his cold eyes and colder demeanor, was far more dangerous than Dmitry Volkov could ever hope to be. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the French doors I'd forgotten to close. For a moment, I was disoriented, my body tensing for the harsh wake-up call I'd grown accustomed to at the restaurant. But there was no Svetlana screaming, no bucket of cold water, no immediate threat. Just birdsong, and the distant sound of someone working in the gardens below. I lay in that soft bed and let myself feel it. The first morning in 6 months where I wasn't immediately terrified. My body ached in different ways now. The exhaustion of escape rather than the constant pain of captivity. My ribs still hurt where Bruno had kicked me, but the hot shower last night and the real food had helped more than I'd expected. A knock at the door made me sit up, pulling the covers instinctively higher. "Come in," I called, my voice still rough with sleep. Sophia entered with another tray, this one laden with breakfast. "Buongiorno, cara. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," I admitted. She set the tray on a small table near the window and began opening the French doors wider, letting in fresh air that smelled of roses and earth. "Signor Colalto requests that you join him in his office after breakfast. No rush. Take your time." After she left, I ate slowly, savoring fresh pastries and fruit and coffee that tasted like heaven. Through the window, I could see the grounds more clearly now. The gardens were extensive and immaculately maintained, with paths winding between flower beds and sculpted hedges. Beyond them, I could see what looked like orchards in the distance. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel after the ugliness I'd been living in. I dressed in jeans and a simple white blouse from the wardrobe, took longer than necessary to arrange my hair, and finally forced myself to leave the sanctuary of my room. A young man I hadn't met before was waiting in the hallway, one of Massimo's security, though he tried to look casual about it. "Signorina," he said with a slight bow. "This way, please." He led me through corridors I hadn't seen yesterday, past rooms that looked like they were rarely used, until we reached a heavy wooden door. He knocked once, then opened it at Massimo's muffled response. The office was exactly what I'd expected. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany. But what I hadn't expected were the photographs. They were everywhere. On the desk, on the shelves, covering one entire wall. All of them showed the same two people. A beautiful woman with long dark hair and luminous eyes, and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3, with her mother's eyes and her father's serious expression. Massimo stood by the window, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking rapid Italian, his voice cold and controlled. I caught the name Volkov and several other words I didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. He was giving orders, and they weren't pleasant ones. He ended the call and turned to face me. In daylight, I could see details I'd missed yesterday. The fine lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. The slight shadow of beard that suggested he hadn't bothered to shave. the wedding ring he still wore on his left hand. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a leather chair facing his desk. I sat, hyper-aware of all those photographs watching me. "Your wife?" I asked quietly, nodding toward the images. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "My late wife. She's been dead for 3 years. I'm sorry. Don't be." His voice was flat, emotionless. "You didn't kill her. I did." The words hung in the air between us, shocking in their bluntness. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just admitted. He moved to his desk, pulling out a legal pad and pen. "Tell me everything you remember about Volkov's operation. Start with the layout of the building." "You just said you killed your wife," I protested. "You can't just—" "I can. And I did." He met my eyes, and the emptiness in them made me shiver. "Now answer my questions, Caroline. The sooner you do, the sooner we can shut down Volkov's operation and save those other girls. Or would you prefer they continue suffering while we discuss my dead wife?" The coldness in his voice was like a slap. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. He was right, in his cruel way. My curiosity about his past didn't matter compared to the girls still trapped in that basement. So I told him. Everything I could remember about the restaurant's layout, the basement rooms, the delivery schedules I'd observed, the guards who rotated shifts, Bruno, who was cruel, and Marco, who was merely indifferent, the clients who visited the private rooms upstairs, the other locations I'd overheard them mention in passing. Massimo took notes with mechanical precision, asking sharp questions that revealed how thoroughly he understood this kind of operation. He didn't react to the worst details, didn't show disgust or anger or anything that suggested he was human beneath that cold exterior. "How many girls did you say were in the basement?" he asked. 5, including me. But I heard Svetlana, she's Dimitri's lieutenant, talking about moving some of us to a location in Naples, and there was mention of a warehouse near the docks. He made more notes. "Names. Give me the names of the other girls if you know them. Anya, Katya, May, and Sophia, but I don't know their last names. They stopped using them after a while." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not quite emotion, but a crack in the ice. "They break you down, make you forget who you were before. Standard tactic. You sound like you have experience with this." "I do." He set down his pen. "Not as a victim, but I've dismantled enough trafficking operations to know how they work. Volkov is particularly vicious, but the methodology is always the same. Strip away identity, isolate from support systems, convince the victims that escape is impossible." "It almost was impossible," I said quietly. "If you hadn't been driving by." "I wasn't driving by." He cut me off. "I was watching the restaurant. My men have had it under surveillance for 2 weeks, gathering intelligence. When my driver saw you run out, he called me. I made a decision." "Why? Why help me specifically?" Massimo was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes studying me with that same clinical assessment. "Because you were running. Most trafficking victims stop trying after the first few attempts. They accept their situation. But you hadn't. That suggested you were stronger than the others, which meant you'd be more useful for gathering information." The honesty of it stung. I'd wanted him to say something noble, that he'd been moved by compassion or duty. But of course, this was a transactional world, and I was simply a useful tool. "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Do you?" He leaned back in his chair. "I doubt it. You're still thinking like someone from your old life, where people do things out of goodness or kindness. That world doesn't exist here, Carolyn. Everything has a price, and nothing is free. I saved you because you're valuable to me. You're providing information that will help me eliminate a competitor and expand my own operations. That's the only reason you're sitting in that chair instead of still scrubbing floors in Volkov's basement." I stood abruptly, anger finally breaking through the fear. Then why the nice room? Why the expensive clothes and the good food? If I'm just a source of information, why not lock me in a cell and interrogate me? Because I'm not an animal. His voice was still calm, but there was steel beneath it. I don't torture women for information. I don't need to. You'll tell me what I want to know because you want those other girls saved as much as I want Volkov eliminated. We both get what we need. That's how this works. And after? Once you have all the information you need and Volkov's operation is shut down, what happens to me? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "You stay here, under my protection. I've already put the word out that you're mine now. Volkov won't dare come after you without starting a war he can't win. But that protection only extends as long as you remain on this property, following my rules. So I'm still a prisoner, just in a nicer cage. Yes. No apology, no attempt to soften it. Just brutal honesty. But you're alive, Caroline. And you're safe. That's more than you had yesterday." He was right, and I hated that he was right. I sank back into the chair, exhausted by the conversation, by the reality of my situation. "What happened to your wife?" I asked, surprising myself. Massimo's expression went completely blank. "That's not relevant to... You said you killed her. How does a man kill his own wife and then wear her ring 3 years later?" I said I killed her. I didn't say I murdered her. His hand went unconsciously to the ring, twisting it. "There's a difference." "Then tell me the difference." For a moment I thought he would refuse, would shut down the conversation and dismiss me. But instead, he stood and walked to the wall of photographs, stopping in front of a larger one, his wife and daughter, both laughing at something off camera, their faces full of life and joy. "Her name was Julia," he said softly, and for the first time, his voice carried actual emotion. "We married young, had Isabella 3 years later. I thought I could keep them separate from my work, build a wall between my family and my business. I was arrogant enough to believe I could have both." He touched the photograph gently, almost reverently. "I was wrong. My enemies didn't care about walls or separation. They saw my wife and daughter as the perfect targets, as weaknesses to exploit." My chest tightened as I realized where this was going. What happened? A rival family decided to send a message. They planted a bomb in Julia's car. His voice was completely flat now, drained of emotion. "She was taking Isabella to her grandmother's house. The explosion killed them both instantly. I was in a meeting when I got the call. I didn't even get to say goodbye." "That wasn't your fault," I said quietly. "You didn't plant that bomb." He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was terrible. Not angry or sad, but utterly dead. I might as well have. I knew the risks. I knew what kind of world I lived in, what kind of enemies I had. But I was selfish. I wanted a family, wanted love, wanted normalcy, and my selfishness got them killed. "Is that why you live like this?" I gestured vaguely at the office, the empty house. "Alone with your guilt." "I live like this because I deserve to, and because I learned my lesson, Caroline. Love is a weakness in my world. Family is a target painted on your back. The only way to survive is to care about nothing and no one, to be as cold and empty as the men who killed my wife and daughter." The pain beneath his words was palpable despite his attempts to bury it. I understood suddenly why he'd helped me, why he'd taken me in. Not just for information, but because saving me was a form of penance. A way to balance the scales for the lives he hadn't been able to save. That's a terrible way to live, I said. Perhaps. But it's the only way that works. He moved back to his desk, the moment of vulnerability over. We're done for today. Sophia will bring lunch to your room. Tomorrow we'll go over the information again. Make sure we haven't missed anything. The raid on Volkov's operation will happen within the week. I stood to leave, but paused at the door. Massimo? Yes? Thank you for telling me about Julia and Isabella. I know it wasn't easy. He didn't respond, just returned his attention to his notes. But as I left, I glanced back and saw him staring at that photograph again, his hand pressed against the glass as though he could somehow reach through and touch what he'd lost. I was beginning to understand that Massimo Colalto wasn't a monster. He was just a man who'd loved too deeply and lost too much, and now lived in the empty shell of what his life used to be. We were both prisoners, I realized. I was trapped by his rules and his protection. But he was trapped by something far worse, by guilt and grief, and the terrible belief that he didn't deserve to be anything more than the cold, empty man he'd become. The afternoon passed slowly. I explored my room more thoroughly, finding a bookshelf stocked with English novels, a writing desk with expensive paper and pens, even a laptop, though when I opened it, I discovered it had no internet access. I was allowed comfort, but not connection to the outside world. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I stood on my balcony and thought about the strange turn my life had taken. A week ago, I'd been scrubbing floors and planning an escape that seemed impossible. Now I was living in a mansion, wearing expensive clothes, and serving as an informant to a mafia boss who wore his dead wife's ring and lived alone with photographs of everything he'd lost. Tomorrow I would tell him more about Volkov's operation. And soon, those girls I'd left behind would hopefully be free. But what happened after that? How long would I remain under Massimo's protection? And what would become of us both, two broken people living in the same beautiful prison? I didn't have answers. All I had was the present moment, the sunset, and the knowledge that I was alive when I could have been dead. For now, I told myself, that would have to be enough. The raid happened on the fourth night. I'd spent the intervening days in a strange routine, mornings with Massimo in his office, going over every detail I could remember, afternoons alone in my room, or walking the gardens under the watchful eyes of his security, evenings at formal dinners where we ate in near silence at opposite ends of that ridiculous table. But something had shifted between us since he'd told me about Julia and Isabella. He was still cold, still controlled, still utterly impossible to read most of the time. But occasionally, I'd catch him watching me with an expression that wasn't quite as empty as before. And sometimes, during our morning sessions, he'd ask questions that had nothing to do with Volkov's operation. What did you study at university? Literature. I wanted to be a writer. And now? Now I just want to survive. He'd nodded, understanding in a way that didn't require words. On the night of the raid, Massimo came to my room just after sunset. I was on the balcony, watching the last light fade from the sky, when I heard the door open behind me. It's happening tonight, he said without preamble. My men are moving on the restaurant in 2 hours. I turned to face him, my heart suddenly hammering. The girls will be extracted safely. That's the priority. He moved to stand beside me at the balcony railing, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody. I wanted you to know before it happened, in case there are complications. What kind of complications? Volkov won't surrender quietly. His men are armed. There will likely be violence. His voice was matter-of-fact, as though discussing the weather rather than potential bloodshed. My team is prepared for that, but I wanted you to understand what saving those girls might cost. I studied his profile in the fading light, the strong jaw, the slight shadow of stubble, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he wasn't in his office maintaining perfect control. You're risking your men for this. For them. Why? I told you why. Volkov is operating in my territory. That's not the real reason. I cut him off, surprising myself with my boldness. You could shut down his operation in a dozen other ways that don't involve a direct raid. This is personal for you. He was silent for a long moment, his hands gripping the balcony railing tight enough that his knuckles went white. 3 years ago, I had the chance to stop an operation like this. I had intelligence about a trafficking ring moving through Calabria. But I was distracted. Julia was pregnant again. We'd just found out. I was focused on my family, on keeping them safe, on preparing for another child. His voice dropped lower. I delayed the raid by 2 weeks, wanting to ensure every detail was perfect, that there was no risk to my men. By the time we moved, the traffickers had relocated, vanished. And 6 months later, I found out what happened to the girls from that operation. Some were sold overseas. Some were killed when they tried to escape. All of them suffered because I prioritized my own happiness over their safety. You can't blame yourself for that. Can I? He turned to face me fully, and the pain in his eyes was raw and real. 2 weeks later, the bomb killed Julia and Isabella. 2 weeks, Caroline. If I'd acted when I first had the intelligence, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I would have been with them that day instead of in that meeting. Maybe I could have saved them. Or maybe you would have died too. I reached out instinctively, my hand covering his on the railing. You can't rewrite the past, Massimo. Trust me, I've tried. All those decisions I made that led me to Volkov's basement. I've replayed them 1,000 times, imagining different choices. But it doesn't change what happened. He stared at my hand on his, and I realized it was the first time I'd voluntarily touched him. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then something darker and more complicated. You should go inside, he said, but he didn't pull his hand away. It's getting cold. I want to know what happens when the raid is over. I'll tell you. His thumb moved slightly, brushing against my fingers in a gesture that might have been unconscious. I promise. Then he was gone, leaving me alone on the balcony with my hand still warm from his touch. The hours that followed were agony. I paced my room, tried to read, attempted to sleep. But all I could think about was Anya, and Katya, and May, and Sophia, still trapped in that basement. Still suffering while I lived in luxury, safe and protected. It was past midnight when I heard vehicles approaching. I rushed to my window and saw several black SUVs pulling up to the main entrance. Men emerged, some supporting others who were clearly injured. And then, wrapped in blankets and looking terrified, 4 young women being helped out by Sophia and Lucia. I didn't think. I just ran. By the time I reached the ground floor, the girls had been brought inside. They huddled together in the entrance hall, eyes wide with fear and confusion, not understanding what was happening or where they were. Anya! I called out, and her head snapped toward me. Recognition flared in her eyes. Caroline? They said you were dead. Dmitri said, I'm fine. You're safe now, all of you. I promise. I moved toward them, but Sophia intercepted me gently. Let us get them settled first, Kara. They need medical attention, food, rest. You can talk with them tomorrow. I watched as Sophia and Lucia led them away, speaking in soft, soothing tones. The girls kept looking back at me, as though I were an anchor in a terrifying sea. Then I saw Massimo. He stood near the entrance with his men, giving quiet orders. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and there was blood on his hands. Whether his own or someone else's, I couldn't tell. When he noticed me, he said something to his men and walked over. You shouldn't be down here, he said. Are you hurt? It's not my blood. He glanced down at his hands with clinical detachment. Volkov resisted. His men fought back. There were casualties. The girls are safe. All 4 of them. Something that might have been satisfaction crossed his face. We also found evidence of 3 other locations. My men are raiding them now. By morning, Volkov's entire operation in Calabria will be shut down. And Volkov himself? Massimo's expression went cold. Dead. He chose to fight rather than surrender. It was unfortunate. The way he said unfortunate made it clear it had been anything but. Massimo had killed him or ordered it done, and felt no remorse. Thank you, I said quietly, for saving them. I told you why I did it. I know, but thank you anyway. We stood there in the dimly lit hallway, and for the first time since I'd met him, Massimo looked almost uncertain. You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult for your friends. They'll need you to help them adjust. What will happen to them? They'll stay here until we can arrange safe passage home. Some may not have homes to return to. In that case, I'll help them find work, legitimate work, somewhere they can rebuild their lives. You don't have to do that. Yes, he said simply. I do. He turned to leave, but I called after him. Massimo, let me help clean those hands, please. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. I led him to a bathroom off the main hall, running warm water in the sink. His hands were covered in blood and dirt, and what looked like gunpowder residue. I took them carefully in mine, washing them with gentle thoroughness. I used to be terrified of blood, I said quietly, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain. When I was little, I couldn't even handle paper cuts without feeling faint. Now look at me. Trauma changes us. His voice was low, contemplative. It reveals who we truly are beneath the civilized veneer. Is that what happened to you? After Julia and Isabella? I was always this person. He watched me work with those dark, unreadable eyes. I just pretended otherwise for a while. Played at being normal, at having a family and a life outside of this world. But the truth is, I was always a monster. I just forgot temporarily. You're not a monster. I dried his hands carefully. Monsters don't feel guilt. They don't wear their dead wife's ring or keep photographs everywhere. They don't risk their own men to save trafficking victims. Then what am I? I looked up at him, at this complicated, damaged man who'd saved me without knowing he needed saving too. You're someone who's convinced himself he doesn't deserve to be human anymore. But you're wrong. His hand came up, cupping my face with a gentleness that contradicted everything he claimed to be. His thumb traced along my cheekbone, and I realized I was crying without having felt the tears start. Caroline, he said. My name a question, and a warning and a plea all at once. Don't, I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was asking him not to do. I can't. His voice was rough with emotion he was trying to suppress. I can't let myself care about you. I can't let you become what Julia was. It's too dangerous. For both of us. Then don't care about me. I placed my hand over his where it rested against my face. Just be human with me. Just for tonight. You've been dead inside for 3 years, Massimo. Don't you want to feel something again? What I want doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. We stood frozen in that moment, his hand on my face, mine covering his, both of us teetering on the edge of something that terrified us equally. I could see the war raging behind his eyes. Duty versus desire. Protection versus connection. The safety of emptiness versus the risk of feeling. Then he pulled away, stepping back as though I'd burned him. Go to bed, Caroline. His voice was cold again, controlled. Tomorrow you'll help your friends adjust. That's why you're here. That's all this is." He left without another word, but I'd seen the crack in his armor, and I knew, with sudden certainty, that neither of us was as safe from each other as we wanted to believe. The next few weeks transformed the estate into something unexpected, a sanctuary filled with voices and life instead of just silence and ghosts. Anya, Katya, May, and Sophia slowly emerged from their shells. The first days were hardest. They barely spoke, flinched at sudden movements, and clustered together like frightened animals. But Sophia, the housekeeper, not the girl with the same name, worked miracles with patience and kindness. She gave them space, provided comfort without overwhelming them, and gradually coaxed them back toward something resembling normalcy. I spent my days with them, helping them navigate this strange new reality. We were all refugees in our own way, trying to remember who we'd been before Volkov's basement had tried to erase us. "How did you do it?" Anya asked me one afternoon. We were in the garden, all 5 of us sitting in the sunshine while Lucia brought tea and pastries. "How did you find the courage to run?" I thought about that moment, pure terror and desperate hope colliding. I didn't feel courageous. I just knew if I didn't try, I'd stop being human completely. I'd become what they wanted me to be. "And now?" Katya asked softly. She was the youngest, barely 19. "Are we his property now instead of Dimitri's?" "No." I said it firmly, even though I wasn't entirely sure. "Massimo isn't like Dimitri. He's dangerous, yes. But he doesn't trade in people. He's helping us." "Why?" May's voice was barely audible. She'd spoken less than anyone, the trauma having stolen most of her words. "Men don't help without wanting something." Before I could answer, a shadow fell across our group. Massimo stood there, and all 4 girls immediately tensed, their eyes dropping to the ground in that terrible learned submission. "Walk with me," he said to me, then added more gently to the others. "Please, continue enjoying the garden. This is your home for as long as you need it." I followed him along one of the winding paths, waiting for him to speak. Since that night after the raid, we'd barely talked. He'd been avoiding me, I thought. Or maybe I'd been avoiding him. The moment in that bathroom had revealed too much, made us both too vulnerable. "They're adjusting well," he said finally. "Sophia says Katya has been helping in the kitchen. She has a talent for cooking. She wants to feel useful. We all do. I've made arrangements for 3 of them. Anya has family in Poland who've been located. May's parents in Taiwan have been contacted. They thought she was dead. Sophia wants to stay in Italy, so I'm arranging work and housing in Rome, far from here." "And Katya?" "Her parents disowned her when they found out what happened to her. They blame her for bringing shame to the family." His voice was hard with anger. "I offered her a position here, on the estate. She can work in the kitchen, learn proper culinary skills. When she's ready, I'll help her find placement at one of the restaurants I have interests in." I stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're being remarkably kind for a man who claims to be a monster. It's practical. Skilled workers are valuable." But his tone lacked conviction. "Massimo." I waited until he looked at me. "Why are you really doing this?" He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching mine. Finally, he said, "Because I couldn't save Julia and Isabella, but I can save them. And maybe if I save enough people, maybe if I do enough good, it'll balance the scales somehow. Make me less of the monster I've become. You can't earn redemption through arithmetic. Perhaps not, but I have to try." We walked in silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on our faces. I noticed small things about him that I'd missed before. The way he unconsciously touched his wedding ring when he was thinking. How his shoulders carried tension like armor. the fleeting expressions that crossed his face when he thought no one was watching. "Caroline," he said suddenly, "your visa expires next month. I've had my lawyers working on an extension, but there are complications. Questions about why you're here, who's sponsoring you. The authorities are curious." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means you have two choices. You can return to America, and I'll ensure you have funds to restart your life there. Or—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "Or we can find another solution." "What kind of solution?" "Marriage." The word was delivered clinically, like a business proposal. "If you marry an Italian citizen, the visa issues disappear. I have lawyers who can arrange it quickly, quietly. It would be purely for legal purposes. Of course, you'd maintain your own residence, your own life. Just paperwork to keep you safe and legal." I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "You want to marry me? I want to keep you protected." His voice was carefully controlled. "This is the most efficient way to do that. Unless you'd prefer to return to Vermont?" The thought of going back to my small town, to the questions and the pity and the impossibility of explaining what had happened. It made me feel ill. But marrying Massimo? Binding myself legally to a man who terrified and fascinated me in equal measure? "I need time to think about it," I said. "Of course. You have 2 weeks before we need to file the paperwork." He turned to walk back toward the house, then paused. "For what it's worth, Caroline, you wouldn't be trapped. If you ever wanted to leave, wanted a divorce, I wouldn't stop you. This is about protection, not possession." After he left, I sank onto a garden bench, my mind reeling. Marriage to Massimo Colalto. It was insane. Practical, yes, but insane. That evening, I found myself in the library, a room I'd discovered my second week here, filled with books in multiple languages. I was reading when Massimo entered, carrying a glass of whiskey. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said, but he didn't leave. "You're not." I closed the book. "I was just thinking. About my proposal?" "Among other things." I studied him in the firelight. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. Do you ever let yourself be happy? Even for a moment?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Happiness feels like a betrayal. Julia and Isabella are dead because of me. How can I allow myself joy when they'll never experience it again? That's not what they'd want." I stood, moving closer to him. "You loved them. Do you think they'd want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself?" "It doesn't matter what they'd want. They're gone. But you're not." I reached out tentatively, placing my hand on his arm. "You're still here, Massimo. Still alive. Doesn't that count for something?" He looked down at my hand, then up at my face. "Being alive isn't the same as living." "Then maybe it's time to learn the difference." Something shifted in his expression. Before I could process it, his hand came up to cup my face, just as it had that night after the raid. But this time, he didn't pull away. "You make me want things I swore I'd never want again," he said, his voice rough. "You make me feel things I promised myself I'd never feel. And that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced." "I'm terrified too," I admitted. "Every time I trust someone, every time I think I'm safe, it falls apart. But Massimo, maybe being terrified together is better than being safe and alone." His thumb traced along my cheekbone, and I could see the war raging behind his eyes. "If I let myself care about you, if I let you in, I put you at risk. Everyone I've ever loved has paid the price for that love. You can't control everything. You can't predict the future. All you can do is choose whether to live in fear of what might happen or embrace what's right in front of you, And what's right in front of me? His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Someone who understands what it's like to survive the unsurvivable. Someone who's seen you at your worst and doesn't run. Someone who's asking you to be brave enough to try again. For a long moment, we stood frozen, the air between us charged with everything unsaid. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head and kissed me. It wasn't like the passionate, desperate kisses I'd read about in books. It was tentative, questioning, almost fragile, as though he was afraid I might shatter under his touch. His lips were soft against mine, tasting of whiskey and something darker, something that spoke of pain and longing and desperate hope. I responded instinctively, my hands finding their way to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath my palms. The kiss deepened gradually, months of tension and denial finally breaking through the walls we'd both built. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I can't promise you safety," he said. "My world is dangerous. My enemies are ruthless. If they discover you matter to me—" "I don't need promises," I interrupted. "I just need honesty. And I need you to stop punishing yourself for surviving when the people you love didn't." "That's not something I know how to do." "Then we'll learn together." I pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I'll marry you, Massimo. Not just for the visa, but because I think we might be able to save each other." His hand tightened on my waist. "You don't know what you're agreeing to." "Maybe not, but I'm choosing it anyway." He kissed me again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. This was claiming and surrender, fear and courage, two broken people reaching for something whole. When Sophia found us the next morning, wrapped in each other on the library sofa where we'd talked through the night, she simply smiled and quietly closed the door. The wedding preparations began immediately. Not a grand affair. Massimo wanted something small, private. Just us, a priest, and the necessary witnesses. The girls would be there, along with Sophia and a handful of his most trusted men. "Are you sure about this?" Anya asked me one afternoon, as Lucia helped fit the simple cream dress Massimo had commissioned. "Marriage to a man like him?" "I'm not sure about anything," I admitted. "But I'm choosing it anyway. That has to count for something." The ceremony took place in the estate's private chapel, a small stone building that had served the Colalto family for generations. Late afternoon light streamed through stained glass windows, painting everything in jewel tones. Massimo waited at the altar in a dark suit, his expression unreadable as I walked toward him. But when I reached his side, when he took my hand in his, I felt it, the slight tremor that revealed how much this cost him, how terrified he was to try again. The priest spoke in Italian, words I didn't fully understand but didn't need to. This was about more than legal vows. This was two people who'd lost everything choosing to risk having something again. When Massimo slipped the ring onto my finger, not an elaborate piece, but a simple gold band that felt right, his dark eyes held mine. "I promise to protect you," he said in English, deviating from the traditional vows. "I promise to be honest with you, and I promise to try to be the man you believe I can be, even when I don't believe it myself." "I promise to stand beside you," I replied. "I promise to remind you that you're human, not a monster. And I promise to help you live instead of just survive." The kiss that sealed our vows was witnessed by people who'd all survived their own hells. And as Massimo held me close, I felt something shift. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of it. The first tentative steps toward becoming whole again. That night, in the master bedroom he'd avoided for 3 years, he finally took down some of the photographs. Not all of them. Giulia and Isabella would always be part of who he was. But he made space for me too. For us. For the future we were choosing to build together. I'm still terrified, he admitted as we lay tangled in sheets. Every moment, I'm waiting for something to destroy this. Me too, I said. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being terrified means we're finally living again. He pulled me closer, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something like peace in his eyes. The first year of our marriage was a study in learning to live again. Massimo moved back into the master bedroom permanently, though some nights he still woke from nightmares, his body tense and his breathing ragged. I'd hold him until the panic passed, whispering that he was safe, that I was safe, that we were both still here. I had my own demons. Sometimes a sudden noise would send me back to that basement, my body remembering terror even when my mind knew I was protected. Massimo would find me curled up somewhere, trembling, and he'd sit beside me without touching, giving me space until I was ready to come back to myself. We healed slowly, in fits and starts, learning that recovery wasn't linear. Some days were good. Some days we both retreated behind our walls. But we always came back to each other. The other girls moved on to their new lives. Anya returned to Poland, sending letters about reuniting with her sister. May went home to Taiwan, where her parents welcomed her with tears and apologies. Sophia found work at a restaurant in Rome and called weekly to share her progress. And Katya stayed with us, becoming part of the household, her talent in the kitchen blooming under the patient guidance of our chef. But new girls kept arriving. Massimo's raid on Volkov's operation had revealed connections to trafficking networks throughout Italy. His men continued to gather intelligence, to shut down operations, to extract victims, and each time they brought the survivors to our estate, to the safety and healing we could provide. We need more space, I said to Massimo one evening, 6 months into our marriage. We were in his office, our office now, reviewing reports from his latest operation. The guest rooms are full. We're housing 12 women now, and there are more being rescued every week. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. What are you proposing? A proper facility. Not just temporary housing, but a real refuge. Somewhere they can stay as long as they need, with counselors and medical care and job training. Somewhere they can rebuild their entire lives, not just survive. And that would require significant resources, staff, security, funding. You have resources. I moved around the desk to stand beside him. You have money and power and connections. Use them for something more than just business interests. Build something that honors Julia and Isabella. Something that saves lives instead of taking them. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. You're asking me to transform part of my empire into something legitimate. I'm asking you to find redemption. Real redemption, not just penance. He was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. Then he said, There's a property about 20 kilometers from here. An old monastery that's been abandoned for decades. It has the space we'd need. Dormitories, common areas, extensive grounds. I've been thinking about acquiring it. You have? I've been thinking about many things since you came into my life. He pulled me onto his lap, his arms encircling me. About what kind of legacy I want to leave. About whether I can be more than just another criminal who justifies his actions as necessary. You're already more than that. Perhaps, but I could be better. His hand moved to rest on my stomach, where a secret neither of us had spoken aloud yet was just beginning to make itself known. Especially now. I caught my breath. You know? Sophia told me you've been sick in the mornings, and I've noticed you're not drinking wine at dinner. His dark eyes held mine. How long have you known? 2 weeks. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. And how do you feel about it? His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the fear beneath it. Fear of history repeating itself. Fear of losing everything again. Terrified, I admitted. And happy. and guilty for being happy when I know what this must bring up for you. His arms tightened around me. I won't lie and say I'm not afraid. The thought of having another child, of risking that kind of love again, it's the most frightening thing I've ever faced. But Caroline, when I think about you carrying our child, about building a family with you, I feel something I thought was dead inside me. Hope. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I'm scared something will go wrong, that I'm not strong enough for this. You survived Volkov's basement. You married a mafia boss. You convinced me I deserved to be human again. He wiped away my tears gently. You're the strongest person I know. That night, lying in bed with his hand protective over my still flat stomach, we talked about the future we were building. The refuge center for trafficking survivors. The child we'd raise together. The possibility that broken people could create something whole. I want to name the center after them, Massimo said quietly. After Giulia and Isabella, so their deaths aren't meaningless. So something beautiful comes from all that pain. They'd like that, I said, and they'd be proud of you, of who you're becoming. I'm only becoming this person because of you. No, you were always this person. You'd just forgotten. The Giulia and Isabella Colalto Center for Rescued Women opened 18 months after our wedding. The renovated monastery could house 50 women comfortably, with private rooms, therapy spaces, job training facilities, and gardens where survivors could find peace. Massimo had transformed part of his empire to fund it, selling off some of his more questionable business interests, legitimizing others, directing profits toward the center's operations. He'd hired professional staff, counselors, doctors, teachers, all carefully vetted and paid generously. But he also remained involved personally, visiting weekly, listening to the women's stories, using his connections to help them reunite with families, or find safe housing or pursue education. You're doing it again, I said one afternoon, watching him talk with a young woman who'd just arrived at the center. Our daughter, Sophia, named for the housekeeper who'd shown us both such kindness, was sleeping in my arms, barely 3 months old. Doing what? He asked, rejoining me. Touching your ring. You do it when you're thinking about Giulia and Isabella. He looked down at the gold band he still wore, then at the matching one on his other hand, the ring I'd given him at our wedding. I was thinking about how proud Giulia would be of this place, of what we've built. She always had a generous heart. She'd love that we're using our resources this way. Do you think you'll ever take off her ring? No, but not because I'm stuck in the past. He touched baby Sophia's tiny hand, his expression soft. I wear it to remember, to honor what I had and what I lost. But I wear yours too, because it reminds me that healing is possible, that loving again doesn't diminish what came before. In the 3 years since I'd run into his car that desperate afternoon, Massimo had transformed. He still ran his criminal empire. Some things couldn't be completely legitimized without putting everyone at risk. But he'd drawn clear lines, rules he wouldn't break. No trafficking, no drugs, no harm to innocents. He'd become a different kind of power in Calabria, still dangerous, still feared, but also respected in unexpected ways. The center had saved over 200 women in its first year alone. Some stayed only weeks, just long enough to recover and reconnect with families. Others remained months or years, rebuilding themselves piece by piece. A few, like Katya, became permanent staff, using their experiences to help others heal. And I'd found my own redemption in the work. I ran the center's operations, coordinated with law enforcement and social services, wrote grant proposals to supplement Massimo's funding. I'd finally become the writer I'd always wanted to be, just not in the way I'd imagined. I wrote the stories of survivors, gave voice to their experiences, used those narratives to raise awareness and funds. She looks like you, Massimo said, studying our daughter, same determination in her eyes. She has your stubbornness, a dangerous combination. But he smiled, real and genuine, and I marveled at how far he'd come from the empty man who'd rescued me. That evening, we stood on the terrace overlooking the center's grounds. Women walked the gardens in small groups, laughing and talking. Some worked in the vegetable plots we'd planted. Others sat in the shade, reading or simply existing in safety. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Taking me in that day?" "Your life was simpler before I complicated it. Simpler, yes, but I wasn't really living." He pulled me close. Baby Sophia nestled between us. "You showed me that surviving isn't enough, that I had a choice between existing as an empty shell or risking pain to feel something real again." "And was it worth the risk?" He kissed the top of my head. "Every moment of fear, every nightmare, every time I wake up terrified I'll lose you. Yes, it's worth it. Because you gave me back my humanity, Caroline. You and Sophia, and all the women we've helped. You gave me a reason to be more than just the monster people feared. You were never really a monster. Perhaps not. But I'd convinced myself I was. That was its own kind of prison." We stood there as the sun set, watching the center's residents settle into evening routines. Safe, protected, healing. I thought about the girl I'd been, running through rain-soaked streets with terror driving her forward. I thought about the man Massimo had been, locked in grief and convinced he deserved nothing but emptiness. We'd both been so broken. But somehow, impossibly, we'd found each other. And in choosing to risk love again, in choosing to build something beautiful from our shared pain, we'd discovered that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it while refusing to be imprisoned by it. "I love you," I said, the words still new enough to make him pause. "I love you too." He gathered both of us closer. My Caroline, my Sophia, my second chance at everything. As night fell over the center, over the refuge we'd built for others, and the family we'd built for ourselves, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just safety or contentment, but genuine joy. The kind that came from choosing life over mere survival. From choosing love despite every reason to remain afraid. Massimo had saved me that day in his car, but I'd saved him too. And together, we were saving others. One woman at a time, one day at a time, building something that transformed pain into purpose and darkness into light. We were living proof that broken people could heal, that love was worth the risk, that redemption was possible, even for those who'd convinced themselves they didn't deserve it. And as I looked at my husband, no longer empty, no longer just surviving, and our daughter sleeping peacefully between us, I knew with absolute certainty that running into Massimo Colalto's car had been the best decision I'd ever made. We'd both been running from different nightmares, but we'd found each other, and that made all the difference.